You ever think about like all the stuff we just kind of assume is going to be safe? Like you grab a bottle of vitamins, you don't even think twice about whether what's on the label is actually in that, or if that pill to stop your headache is actually going to do the trick.
It's so true we put a lot of faith in the products we use every day, especially when it comes to our health, like with medicines or supplements.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we forget about the huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that trust we have isn't misplaced.
And a really key part of that system that guarantees the quality of those products, those medicines and supplements you were talking about, is something called GMP audits.
GMP audits.
GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practice. And these audits are super important in the pharmaceutical and dietary supplement industries.
Okay, so today we are going behind the scenes, pulling back the curtain on these GMP audits, these good manufacturing practice audits.
That's right. Consider this your crash course, your deep dive into how these audits work to make sure the products you use are safe and actually do what they say they're going to do.
All right, so we're talking about GMP audits. We're talking about these practices that are used to verify that these manufacturers are following regulations like cGMP, so current good manufacturing practice.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at how those regulations are actually put into practice.
And this is about ultimately protecting the consumer, right? It's about giving us a clear picture of how the safety and quality of the products we use are protected.
Absolutely. That's the whole point.
So to do this deep dive, we've been looking at a bunch of different sources.
Yeah, we've been digging into some pretty heavy stuff to really understand all the ins and outs of GMP audits.
Okay, like what?
We've got excerpts from the actual Code of Federal Regulations, parts 110 and 111 to be exact, that spell out all the legal requirements that manufacturers have to follow.
So straight from the source, the official rules.
Yep. And to get a more practical perspective, we've also watched YouTube videos from experts at the FDA and some industry pros.
Oh, that's cool. Getting the inside scoop from the people who are actually doing this work.
Yeah, it's been super helpful. And to round things out, we've also incorporated some detailed handbooks and analogies that really break down the specifics of how audits are conducted.
Okay, so we've got the laws, the expert opinions, and the how-to guide. Sounds like we're well equipped for this deep dive.
I think so.
So what exactly are we setting out to do today? What's our mission?
Well, first off, we want to break down the different kinds of GMP audits that exist because it's not just one size fits all.
Makes sense. Different audits for different purposes.
Exactly. And then we'll look at how these audits are specifically designed to uncover any weak spots in the manufacturing process or the overall quality system.
So kind of like a detective searching for clues of where things could go wrong.
Exactly. It's about finding those potential problems before they become big problems.
Okay, makes sense. And what else are we going to be exploring?
Well, we'll also look at how audits help companies continuously improve. It's not just about catching mistakes. It's about learning from them and getting better all the time.
Okay, so that's like the positive side of audits, using them as a tool for growth.
Right. And lastly, we'll dive into the crucial role of documentation and follow-up in the whole audit process.
Yeah, I imagine that's really important, keeping track of everything and making sure any problems that are found actually get fixed.
You got it. Documentation is key in this whole world.
Okay, so let's get down to business. We keep hearing about these internal audits. What exactly are they?
Internal audits are kind of like when a company checks its own homework.
They grade themselves.
In a way, yeah. They assess their own operations, their own practices, and make sure everything is lining up with those cGMP standards we were talking about, current drug manufacturing practices.
Okay, so it's like an internal checkup to make sure they're following the rules.
That's a good way to put it. And the important thing is that it's proactive. They're doing this on their own, regularly, not just waiting for an outside inspection.
So they're staying ahead of the game, finding potential problems before someone else does.
Exactly. It's all about minimizing risk and ensuring consistent quality.
Okay, so let's say a company's doing an internal audit. What are some of the things they're going to be focusing on?
Well, one of the biggest things is sanitation. They're going to be looking really closely at the facilities themselves.
Just like, is the place clean?
Well, it goes beyond just basic cleanliness. They're checking things like the water systems, making absolutely sure there's no chance of contamination.
Like what kind of contamination?
Think backflow prevention or cross-contamination between wastewater and clean water lines. All that stuff's laid out in 21 CFR Part 110. It's super important to prevent any kind of contamination from the get-go.
Yeah, you don't want something like a plumbing issue to mess up a whole batch of medicine.
Exactly. They'll also look at the sewage disposal system and even the condition of the restrooms to make sure everything is up to code.
Wow, so it's really a thorough look at the entire facility?
Yep. And then they'll move on to equipment.
Like the machines they use to make the product?
All the equipment, yeah. The manufacturing equipment, the testing equipment, the packaging equipment, everything has to be in tip-top shape.
So they're just making sure it's all there, right?
Not just that it's there, but that it's properly maintained, cleaned regularly, and calibrated correctly.
Calibrated?
Yeah, so that the equipment is producing accurate and consistent results.
Okay, that makes sense. If your tools aren't working right, your product might not be right either.
Exactly. And there's a huge emphasis on documentation here. The video by Devon Edwards and the EAS Consulting Group video both talked about this. You got to have detailed logbooks to keep track of all the maintenance, cleaning, and calibration.
So you can prove that everything was done correctly.
Proof is key. And EAS Consulting Group pointed out that even moving a piece of equipment can affect its qualified status.
You mean like if you move a machine to a different spot in the factory?
Yep, they have to re-verify that it's still working properly in its new location.
Wow, so every little detail matters.
Absolutely, you have to think about every potential point where something could go wrong and have a system in place to prevent that.
Okay, so we've talked about sanitation, equipment. What else do these internal audits cover?
Well, of course, they're going to look at the actual manufacturing processes themselves. Are they sticking to their standard operating procedures?
So are they following the recipe, so to speak?
Exactly. Those SOPs, those standard operating procedures, are like the rule book for making the product. Everything from start to finish manufacturing, testing, packaging, even distribution needs to be clearly documented and consistently followed.
No going rogue in the factory.
Right. If you don't have clear procedures and everyone's doing their own thing, you're just asking for trouble. Inconsistency can lead to mistakes and potentially unsafe products.
And we're back to documentation again.
Always. Remember, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. We heard that over and over in our research, including that Season 4 transcript.
Okay, so documentation is crucial for showing that everyone is following the SOPs.
It is. It's the proof that everything is being done according to plan.
All right, what about the lab side of things, where they test the product?
Yeah, the lab is super important. Internal audits will definitely scrutinize the lab controls and testing procedures.
So they're checking to make sure the lab is doing their job right.
Exactly. They need to be using scientifically sound methods. Methods that have been validated. The EAS Consulting Group video talked about that, and so did Kim Hunba's book.
So you got to make sure the tests themselves are reliable.
Absolutely. Otherwise, the results are meaningless.
It's like if your measuring stick is broken, you can't really measure anything accurately.
That's a great analogy. The tests have to be accurate in order to get a true picture of the quality of the product.
Okay, so they look at the facilities, the equipment, the processes, the lab. What about the actual materials, the stuff they use to make the product?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Material handling and storage are huge. They need to prevent any kind of contamination there as well.
So it's not just about keeping the factory clean, but also how they store and handle everything.
Right. The raw materials that come in, the finished products that are ready to ship out, everything needs to be stored properly to protect it from contamination.
It's kind of like, even if you have the best ingredients, if you leave them out on the counter, they're going to go bad.
Exactly. And there are regulations about this too. Part 110 of the CFR specifically talks about it. It's not just common sense, it's the law.
So it sounds like these internal audits are really comprehensive. They cover pretty much every aspect of the operation. What are the main benefits for a company to do these internal audits?
Well, first off, they're going to uncover weaknesses that the company might not even know about. It's kind of like getting a second opinion, a fresh set of eyes on your operations.
So it's like finding those blind spots, the things you might miss if you're too close to it.
Yep. And by finding them early, they can prevent them from becoming big problems later on.
Like preventing a product recall or something like that?
Exactly. That's a huge benefit. And second, it helps ensure that their quality management system is actually working as intended.
It's one thing to have a plan on paper, but it's another to make sure it's actually being followed in practice.
Right. Internal audits help bridge that gap between theory and reality.
Okay, so that's kind of like checking that the system itself is working. And what's the third big benefit?
Internal audits really foster a culture of continuous improvement within the company.
So it's not just about passing the test, it's about always striving to do better.
Yes. By identifying areas where they can improve, companies can refine their processes, enhance their quality, and ultimately produce even better products.
Okay, so it's like constantly raising the bar.
Exactly. It's about making good even better.
That's great. Okay, so we've got the inside perspective with internal audits. What about when someone from outside the company comes in to do an audit? What's the purpose of that?
So these are called external audits, and they're typically conducted by regulatory bodies like the FDA, by customers, or by third-party organizations.
Okay, so different groups with different motivations for auditing a company.
Right. But the main objective is always the same: to assess the company's compliance with the relevant regulations and standards. It's an independent check to make sure everything's on the up and up.
So it's like having an impartial judge come in and give their verdict.
That's a good way to put it.
Let's talk specifically about the FDA inspections. What exactly do those involve?
Well, the FDA's role is to monitor compliance with regulations and to ensure the safety and integrity of everything from the research data into the finished products.
So they're really overseeing the entire process, from the initial research to the products that end up in our hands.
That's right. They're looking to make sure companies are following all the rules and that those medicines and supplements we rely on are actually safe and effective.
And what happens if they find something during an inspection that's not quite right?
Well, that's when they issue a Form FDA 483.
A 483, what's that?
It's a formal notification that the FDA gives to the company's management at the end of an inspection. It basically lists out any observations, any potential deviations from the regulations that the investigator has identified.
So it's kind of like a warning, a heads up that they've found some issues.
It's more like, hey, we noticed this and you need to address it.
And does that automatically mean the company is in trouble?
Not necessarily. The important thing to remember here, and this was emphasized in the FDA CITC Day 3 transcript, is that these are observations, not automatic violations.
So it's not a guilty verdict right away.
No, the FDA will review the observations more carefully before deciding if any further action is necessary.
Okay, so the FDA points out these potential issues. What does the company do next?
They have to respond to the 483 in writing, usually within 15 business days.
So they get a chance to explain themselves.
Right. It's their opportunity to show that they understand the observations and to outline how they're going to fix them. The FDA takes their response into consideration when making a final determination.
So it's like a back and forth process, not just a one-way street.
Exactly. The company gets to have their say, and the FDA considers that before making any decisions.
What happens if the FDA isn't satisfied with the company's response, or if the issues are really serious?
Well, in more serious cases, the FDA might designate the facility as OAI, which stands for Official Action Indicated.
Official action indicated. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. It means the FDA has serious concerns about the facility's compliance with cGMP, and they're likely to take further action.
Like what kind of action?
They might do follow-up inspections to make sure the company has actually fixed the problems, or they might take more drastic measures depending on the situation.
Okay, so OAI is definitely something companies want to avoid. We also came across something called remote regulatory assessments. What are those all about?
Yeah, those are getting more common now. It's a way for the FDA to assess compliance without actually having to physically visit the facility every time.
So kind of like a virtual inspection.
In a way, yeah, they might request documents electronically or have virtual meetings to evaluate the company's practices.
And this is something new that the FDA is doing.
Relatively new, and it's becoming an increasingly important part of their toolkit. Emily Jeva talked about this in her presentation transcript. It could be mandatory, where the FDA has the legal authority to demand information remotely, or it could be voluntary, where the company agrees to participate.
So it gives the FDA more flexibility in how they conduct their oversight.
Exactly. It's a way to be more efficient and cover more ground.
Okay, so the FDA has a few different ways of keeping tabs on things. What about those customer or third-party audits we mentioned earlier? Why would those be done?
Well, those are often done when a company wants to evaluate their suppliers or any contract manufacturers they might be using.
So it's like checking up on the companies they're doing business with.
Right. It's about making sure that everyone in their supply chain is meeting the required standards.
So if I'm a pharmaceutical company and I'm buying raw materials from a supplier, I might want to audit them to make sure they're following all the right procedures.
Exactly. And those audits often use standardized checklists, sometimes based on ISO standards or specific regulatory requirements.
So it's like having a common set of criteria to evaluate against.
Yeah, it provides a consistent framework for assessing quality and compliance across the board.
Makes sense. And that brings us specifically to supplier audits. What's the main goal of those?
Supplier audits are all about ensuring the quality and reliability of all the ingredients that go into a product.
Not just the raw materials, but everything.
Everything, yeah. Raw materials, packaging components, even services that are outsourced. If it comes from a supplier, it needs to be vetted.
So it's like a chain. You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Exactly. If you're using subpar materials or relying on a supplier with poor practices, it's going to affect the quality of your final product.
No matter how good your own manufacturing process is.
Right. You can't make a perfect product from imperfect ingredients.
So what do these supplier audits typically focus on? What are they looking at?
They really delve into the supplier's entire quality system, their processes, their controls, their documentation.
So it's like a mini audit of the supplier themselves.
Pretty much. They're looking at how the supplier manages their own incoming materials, how they test things, their overall approach to quality management.
And this all ties back to that idea of ensuring the quality of the final product, right?
Absolutely. Even tiny impurities in the raw materials, for example, can have a big impact on the quality of the final drug or supplement. We saw that in the ICH-Q11 Q&A's transcript. It's all connected.
So it's about managing risks and ensuring quality every step of the way.
That's the goal.
Okay, we've covered the different types of audits, internal, external, and supplier. Now let's talk about the audit process itself. What are some of the common elements across all these different audits?
Well, one of the most important things is that they all follow a systematic approach. It's not just random checking, it's a structured and planned evaluation.
So there's a method to the madness.
Definitely. They use a very deliberate methodology to make sure they're covering all the bases and getting a complete picture of the company's operations and compliance.
Okay, so it's not just showing up and poking around, it's a much more organized process.
Exactly. And the whole point of this systematic approach is to uncover any weaknesses or vulnerabilities in the processes.
So they're looking for potential problems.
They're looking for anything that doesn't meet the standards, anything that could compromise the quality of the product.
Okay, so they're identifying problems, but it's not just about finding problems, right? It's about fixing them and preventing them from happening again.
You got it. And that's where CAPO comes in, corrective and preventive actions.
So it's not just about pointing out what's wrong, it's about figuring out why it's wrong and how to make it right.
Exactly. And it's a continuous process. You identify an issue, you fix it, and then you put measures in place to prevent it from happening again.
Okay, so audits are really driving this continuous improvement cycle.
They are a key driver, yeah. They force companies to take a hard look at themselves and make changes for the better.
Now, we've talked about the importance of documentation throughout this deep dive. What role does documentation play in the audit process itself?
Documentation is absolutely essential to the entire audit process. It's the proof, the evidence that everything is being done correctly.
So if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Pretty much. You need records of everything: audit plans, schedules, checklists, observations, findings. It all has to be meticulously documented.
And why is all this documentation so important?
Well, for one thing, it provides a clear record of what was audited, what was found, and what actions were taken. It creates accountability.
So it's like a trail of breadcrumbs showing exactly what happened during the audit.
Exactly. And it's also important for follow-up. You need to be able to track the progress of any corrective actions and make sure the problems are actually being addressed.
So the documentation doesn't end when the audit is over.
No, it continues as the company works to implement those corrective actions and verify that they've been effective.
Okay, so documentation is a key part of the whole process from start to finish. And speaking of finishing, what happens after the audit? What's the next crucial step?
The most important thing is the follow-up on those corrective actions. It's not enough to just identify the problems. You have to actually fix them.
It's kind of like going to the doctor, getting a diagnosis, but then not taking the medicine they prescribe.
That's a good analogy. The audit is like the diagnosis, and the corrective actions are the treatment. You got to follow through with the treatment to get better.
Okay, so the company needs to actually implement those changes, those fixes.
Yes, and then they need to verify that those changes have actually worked. This is all about closing the loop and ensuring that the issues don't come up again.
So it's not just about checking boxes, it's about actually making things better.
Exactly. Continuous improvement is the goal.
Okay, so we've covered the different types of GMP audits and the overall process. Now let's tie it all together. What's the ultimate purpose of all this? What role do these GMP audits play in ensuring compliance within these industries?
At their heart, GMP audits are about verifying compliance with cGMP standards. That's their primary role. They're the mechanism for making sure companies are following those good manufacturing practices that we've been talking about.
So it's about checking that they're playing by the rules.
That's part of it, but it's more than just checking boxes. They're looking to see if the company truly understands the principles behind the regulations and if they're applying those principles in a meaningful way.
That's about the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law.
Exactly. And they're also looking at the big picture, evaluating the effectiveness of the entire quality management system.
Not just isolated processes, but the whole system that's in place to ensure quality.
Right. They're asking, is this system actually capable of consistently producing safe and effective products?
And they're also looking ahead, trying to identify potential risks before they become problems.
Absolutely. That's the proactive element of audits. They help companies identify areas where they might be vulnerable and implement controls to mitigate those risks.
So audits are really playing a crucial role in ensuring the quality and safety of the products we use.
They are. And they're a big part of why we can trust those products, why we can have confidence that they'll do what they're supposed to do.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned about GMP audits. We started with internal audits, those self-checks that companies do to make sure they're on track.
Right. Those are all about proactive identification of problems and continuous improvement.
Then we looked at external audits, those independent assessments conducted by the FDA, customers, or third-party organizations.
External audits provide that crucial outside perspective, making sure companies are meeting those broader regulatory requirements and industry standards.
And we also talked about supplier audits, which focus specifically on ensuring the quality and reliability of all the materials and services that go into the manufacturing process.
Because the quality of the final product depends on the quality of every ingredient and every process along the way.
And regardless of the type of audit, they all share that systematic approach, designed to uncover any weaknesses and drive those corrective and preventive actions that lead to better products.
And of course, none of it would be possible without meticulous documentation and thorough follow-up to ensure those problems are truly fixed.
So it's a complex system with a lot of moving parts, but ultimately it's all about protecting the consumer.
Absolutely. It's about ensuring that the medicines and supplements we use are safe, effective, and meet the highest quality standards.
It really makes you appreciate the work that goes into making sure the products we use every day are reliable.
It does. And it makes you think, what other unseen processes are out there working behind the scenes to keep us safe and healthy?
That's a great question. It's like a whole hidden world that most of us never even think about.
Exactly. And it's a testament to the importance of regulations, of good manufacturing practices, and of those dedicated professionals who are constantly working to ensure the quality of the products we depend on.
Well said.